At 20 years old, Claudell Washington looked like Oakland's next star. He was already a World Series champion. In 1975, his first full Major League season, he hit 308, collected 182 hits, stole 40 bases, and made the American League All-Star team. He had speed, range, and enough offense to finish fifth in the league in batting average. Nearly every part of his game seemed to point forward. Then, before he turned 23, the Athletics traded him. Washington had reached the majors faster than almost anyone could have expected. Staying in one place would prove much harder. Over the next 13 years, he would cross both leagues, wear 7 different uniforms, and keep finding new ways to matter. But to understand why the trade from Oakland changed the shape of his career, you have to understand how unlikely it was that he reached Oakland at all. Washington was born in Los Angeles in 1954 and raised in Berkeley, just a short trip from where the Athletics played. He attended Berkeley High School, but his route into professional baseball did not run through the school team. The coach wanted him to pitch. Washington wanted to be an outfielder. The disagreement meant that a future Major League outfielder never played baseball for Berkeley High. He also worked as a janitor. There was no draft day ceremony waiting for him, no established place in the prospect system, no long record of organized high school competition for scouts to study.
Washington was playing sandlot baseball when Jim Gwynn, a scout for the Oakland Athletics, saw him. In 1972, Oakland signed Washington as an undrafted free agent for $3,000. The amount tells you something about where he stood at the beginning. The Athletics had found an intriguing young athlete close to home, but Washington entered professional baseball without the investment or attention attached to a prized draft pick. Whatever future he had, he would have to make it visible quickly. He did. Washington passed through 3 Oakland minor league affiliates, and on July 5, 1974, less than 2 years after signing, the Athletics brought him to the major leagues. He was 19 years old. The Oakland Alameda County Coliseum was a broad concrete bowl with enormous stretches of foul territory, and the Athletics' green and gold standing out against the gray. Voices from the public address system carried through the structure. From the field, the upper deck rose in long, open lines around a club that had already learned what October felt like. Into that setting came a teenager who had not played for his high school team. Washington made his debut against the Baltimore Orioles. He received 1 at-bat and did not get a hit. There was no storybook first swing preserved in the box score. What mattered was that he was there at all, facing major league pitching at 19 for the defending World Series champions.
For fans who first learned baseball in the 1970s, this may be where memory begins. The bright colors on the uniforms, the hard edges of the multi-purpose stadiums, and a scorecard that made every unfamiliar young player feel like someone worth watching. Washington was one of those names then, still new enough that nobody in the stands could know how far it would travel. The 1974 Athletics returned to the World Series and won it. Washington's first major league season ended with a championship, an extraordinary destination reached almost before his professional career had time to establish a rhythm. 2 years earlier, he had been outside the usual pipeline, working as a janitor and playing sandlot ball. Now he was a major leaguer on a championship team. The question was no longer whether Claudell Washington belonged. The question was what would happen once he had a full season to show what he could do. In 1975, the answer came quickly. Washington played 148 games in the outfield and received 590 at-bats. Oakland was no longer giving a teenager a brief look. At 20, he had become an everyday major leaguer for the defending champions. And he hit. Washington finished the season with a .308 batting average, the 5th best mark in the American League.
His 182 hits ranked 4th. Of those, 141 were singles, also 4th in the league, a number that reveals the pressure his game could create before the ball ever reached a gap.
Once Washington reached first base, the defense still had work to do. He stole 40 bases, second most in the American League. In an era when speed could reshape an inning, Washington brought it to the field almost every day. A single was no longer only a single when the runner could threaten second. An infielder had less time to make a play. A pitcher had another responsibility between pitches. The defense had to account for Washington even while preparing for the next hitter. He was also more than a base-stealing specialist. The batting average and hit total placed him among the league's most productive hitters, while his defensive workload showed that Oakland trusted him with an everyday place in the outfield. Washington spent most of that season in left field, where the available measures credited him with strong range and reliable overall defense. Then came the clearest recognition of how rapidly his standing had changed. Washington was selected to the American League All-Star team. He was 20 years old. The All-Star game of that period still carried the sharp division between leagues. Players spent the regular season almost entirely within their own circuit, and the midsummer meeting placed baseball's most recognizable names together in a setting fans rarely saw elsewhere. Washington had entered professional baseball as an undrafted free agent 3 years earlier. Now the American League had selected him as one of its best players.
If you watched baseball then, think back to how a young player first became real to you. Maybe it was his name appearing among the league leaders in the newspaper. Maybe it was an all-star broadcast on a summer night when seeing him beside the established stars carried more weight than any scouting report. In 1975, Washington had both. His numbers confirmed the performance, and the All-Star selection gave it a national stage. He even received votes in the American League Most Valuable Player race. He finished 14th, well outside serious contention for the award, but the votes showed that his season had registered beyond Oakland. At an age when many players were still trying to escape the minor leagues, Washington had become one of the most visible young outfielders in baseball. That season established the expectation that would follow him for the rest of his career. A .308 average, 40 stolen bases, an all-star selection at 20, a championship already behind him. Washington appeared to have reached the beginning of something, not the summit. But baseball careers are not obligated to develop in a straight line. Young stars do not always remain with the organizations that discover them, and early success does not guarantee that the next season will look like the last one. Washington remained with Oakland through 1976. Then, on March 26, 1977, the Athletics traded him to the Texas Rangers for second baseman Rodney Scott, left-handed pitcher Jim Umbarger, and cash.
The transaction arrived before Washington's 23rd birthday. The organization that had found him on a sandlot, brought him to the majors at 19, and watched him become an all-star at 20, was sending him away. A trade does not erase what came before it. Washington's 1975 season remained exactly what it had been, one of the strongest performances by a player his age. But the move to Texas changed what that season would mean. Instead of serving as the secure foundation of a long Oakland career, it became the standard Washington would carry from one organization to another. He left the Bay Area with a World Series championship, an all-star selection, and proof that he could be an everyday impact player in the American League. What he did not leave with was permanence. Texas would be the first test of what remained after the future everyone could see in 1975 began taking a different shape. Texas did not become the stable second home that Oakland had been. Washington played the 1977 season with the Rangers, and some parts of his game remained familiar. He continued to run, continued to reach base often enough to force defenses to account for him, and drew 9 intentional walks,
sixth most in the American League. But the larger direction of his career had changed. He was no longer the 20-year-old revelation growing inside one organization. He was now a young player carrying an all-star season into a club that had acquired him to become part of its own plans.
Those plans lasted barely more than a year. On May 16, 1978, Texas traded Washington and Rusty Torres to the Chicago White Sox for Bobby Bonds. Bonds was one of the most prominent power and speed players of his generation, and his name gave the deal immediate weight. For Washington, it meant another clubhouse, another uniform, and another attempt to establish himself. He struggled in 1978, both before and after the trade. 3 years removed from hitting .308, he had reached the first sustained period when his production no longer resembled that early peak. At 23, Washington had already been a champion, an all-star, and the centerpiece of expectations that now seemed to be receding. The next season would determine whether 1975 remained a foundation or began to look like an exception. In 1979, he answered. Washington rebounded with a solid season for the White Sox. He hit 33 doubles, one of the 10 highest totals in the American League, and showed that the speed player from Oakland carried another kind of threat. On July 14, Washington hit 3 home runs in one game. For one day, there was no need to compare him with the player he had been at 20. A 3-home-run game belongs entirely to the present. Each trip to the plate changes the way the next one feels. After the first, a hitter has supplied power. After the second, everyone recognizes the possibility. By the third, the game has narrowed around one man and one swing.
Washington had always been known for what his legs could do. That afternoon, his power took over the game. The performance did not restore the fixed path that once seemed to lie ahead of him. Baseball careers do not work that neatly. It did, however, remind the league that Washington could still produce something extraordinary. And less than a year later, he would do it again, in another league and another uniform. The White Sox traded Washington to the New York Mets on June 7, 1980, receiving minor leaguer Jesse Anderson in return. It was Washington's third trade in a little more than 3 years. Oakland to Texas, Texas to Chicago, Chicago to New York. The sequence could have swallowed the identity of a less adaptable player. Washington kept moving and kept playing. On June 22nd, only 15 days after joining the Mets, he hit 3 home runs in a game again. This time, he did it in the National League. That second performance placed him in a remarkable historical group. Washington became only the 3rd player to hit 3 home runs in one game in both leagues. The first 2 were Babe Ruth and Johnny Mize. The company mattered because it revealed something easy to miss when Washington's career is remembered mainly through his speed or his travels. His power did not arrive with the regularity of the game's great home run hitters, but it could erupt. Twice, on opposite sides of baseball's old league divide, it took over an entire game. In those years, changing leagues meant more than changing opponents on a schedule. Before regular interleague play, the American and National Leagues maintained separate identities. Their teams met on the field only in spring exhibitions, the All-Star Game, and the World Series. Washington's achievement crossed a line that felt much more distinct in 1980 than it would decades later. Fans who followed baseball through box scores and late local highlights may remember how distant the other league could seem. A player could vanish from your nightly broadcast after a trade, then reappear in the morning paper under a different set of standings. Washington had already been seen in Oakland, Arlington, Chicago, and New York. Now one rare accomplishment connected all that movement. His time with the Mets remained brief. After the 1980 season, Washington became a free agent. For the first time,
The next turn in his career did not begin with another team deciding where to send him. Washington could choose where to continue. On November 15, 1980, he signed with the Atlanta Braves. Atlanta offered something Washington had not possessed since leaving Oakland: time. He joined the Braves for the 1981 season and stayed for 5.5 years, by far his longest stretch with any club. After the constant movement from 1977 through 1980, simply returning to the same organization season after season changed the shape of his career. He was 26 when he arrived.
The label of young phenom no longer applied, and the extraordinary Oakland season was now 6 years in the past. Atlanta did not need him to become 20 again. The Braves needed the player he had become, an experienced outfielder whose speed could alter an inning and whose bat still carried more power than his reputation sometimes suggested. That version of Washington became especially important in 1982. The Braves were pushing toward the postseason, and September placed every result under greater pressure. At Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, the circular decks enclosed a field where baseball shared its concrete home with football. The Braves' white uniforms flashed under the lights, organ music and public address calls traveled through the open air, and every look at the out-of-town scores carried the weight of a pennant race. Washington delivered his best month at the moment Atlanta needed it most. He was named National League Player of the Month for September. The honor measured sustained production, not one isolated afternoon. Through the final weeks of the regular season, with the standings tightening and each lost opportunity becoming harder to recover, Washington repeatedly helped move the Braves closer to October. A later measure of championship win probability credited him with the greatest pennant race impact in the National League that season. In plain terms, Washington's contributions tended to arrive when they could change Atlanta's chances most.
For those who remember following the 1982 Braves, the season may return through more than wins and losses. It was the habit of checking the standings every morning, hearing another score on the radio, and understanding that a game in September could make an entire summer feel different. Washington occupied that pressure with the strongest month of his season. Atlanta won the National League West. 7 years had passed since his first All-Star season. Washington's career had crossed 3 additional organizations and survived the difficult year of 1978. Yet here he was, central to another meaningful race. That September showed why the story could not end with the trade from Oakland. The early promise had not developed into one uninterrupted climb, but the talent had not disappeared. It resurfaced in a different form, for a different team, under different stakes. 2 years later, the league recognized him again. Washington was selected to the 1984 National League All-Star team at age 29. His first selection had come in the American League at 20. The 9 years between them contained almost the entire argument over how his career should be understood. The first All-Star appearance had announced possibility. The second confirmed endurance. By 1984, Washington had demonstrated that his value was not confined to one brilliant young season or one league.
He had crossed the sport, adjusted to repeated changes, and returned to the All-Star stage long after the straightforward version of his future had vanished. Then, in 1985, one of the most widely seen images of Claudell Washington's career came from an ordinary play that had nothing to do with an award. On June 5th, the Braves played the Cubs in Chicago. Wrigley Field still had no lights, so the game unfolded in daylight beneath the hand-operated center field scoreboard. The brick outfield walls and rooftop sightlines belonged to an older baseball world, while the crowded neighborhood outside carried the sound of the afternoon beyond the park. Washington hit a foul ball. Game footage captured it traveling into the stands, where it was caught by a spectator. There was nothing historic about the result. The play did not change Washington's season or decide a championship, but the footage was later used in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. In the movie, the ball is caught by Ferris, who is supposed to be homesick from school. The moment lasted because fiction gave it a new life. Movie audiences saw Washington at the plate in an actual Braves-Cubs game, even if many never knew the hitter's name or the date on which the footage had been recorded. If that film was part of your first encounter with Wrigley Field, Washington may have entered your baseball memory without an introduction.
Long after the box score stopped mattering, his swing remained on television screens, videotapes, and movie nights. One foul ball became embedded in the popular memory of the 1980s. There is an irony in that survival. Washington had accumulated years of real major league production, helped Atlanta win a division, and returned to the All-Star game. Yet for millions of people, the most familiar image of him may be a ball that left the field of play and entered someone else's story. His Atlanta years also included a far more serious public chapter. In 1985, Washington was among the players caught up in the Pittsburgh drug trial scandal. The proceedings exposed cocaine use within Major League Baseball and forced the sport to confront a problem that extended across multiple teams and prominent players. In 1986, Washington was given a 60-day suspension. He was allowed to continue playing if he donated 5% of his base salary and completed 50 hours of drug-related community service. The episode belongs in the record of his career. It brought consequences beyond a batting average or a trade and placed him inside one of the defining scandals of baseball in that decade. It should neither be minimized nor allowed to consume everything around it. Washington had already spent more than a decade in the majors, and his career still had years remaining. By the summer of 1986, his long period of stability in Atlanta was ending.
On June 30, the Braves traded Washington and infielder Paul Zuveller to the New York Yankees for outfielder Ken Griffey Sr. and infielder Andre Robertson. Washington was 31. He was moving again, this time to a franchise where history had a way of attaching itself to every uniform number and every home run. The Yankees of the late 1980s were filled with recognizable names and constant expectations. Washington arrived as a veteran rather than a future centerpiece. His value now lay in experience, versatility, and the ability to contribute without needing the club to build around him. He played out the 1986 season in New York, became a free agent, and then chose to return. Washington re-signed with the Yankees in December and remained with them for 2 more years. That decision gave him another period of continuity. It also positioned him for a small but permanent place in Yankees history. In April 1988, Washington hit the 10,000th home run in franchise history. By then, Yankees home runs carried generations of accumulated meaning. Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, Maris, and every player who had followed them were part of the count. The number had been building across decades, one swing at a time, until it reached Washington. The stadium sound rose, the ball was gone, and a veteran outfielder in his 15th Major League season had supplied the round number. Washington had hit many more consequential home runs in his life, including 6 on the 2 days when he went deep 3 times.
This one endured because of where it fit in the long arithmetic of the Yankees. Think of how fans learned milestones before every statistic was available instantly. The total might appear on a telecast graphic, in the next day's newspaper, or in a note beside the box score. A home run could become part of franchise history only after someone explained the count.
Washington's swing was the one that turned 9,999 into 10,000. His game was still changing with age. The player who had stolen 40 bases in 1975 could not remain 20 forever. Washington continued to find places in Major League outfields, including center field for portions of the 1988 season. Available range figures placed him among the American League leaders there, evidence that athletic usefulness remained even late in his career. After the 1988 season, Washington became a free agent again. In January 1989, he signed with the California Angels. The move took him back to his birth state and into the seventh organization of his career. By now, the pattern was familiar. A new contract brought another uniform, another clubhouse, and another role to learn. His career had long since stopped resembling the single franchise story that 1975 once seemed to promise. Yet teams continued to make room for him. Washington played for California in 1989 and began the 1990 season with the Angels. Then, on April 29th, he was traded once more.
The Angels sent Washington and pitcher Rich Monteleone to the Yankees for outfielder Luis Polonia. At 35, Washington returned to New York. There was a certain symmetry to the final move, although not the kind that could have been planned at the beginning. He had started with a team near the place where he was raised, crossed the country and both leagues, then returned to a club where he had already spent several veteran seasons. His last Major League career came on June 18, 1990, against Milwaukee. He did not receive an at-bat. There was no final hit to mirror the beginning, no ceremonial conclusion preserved in the statistics. Washington's Major League career ended the way many long careers do. The player appeared in one more game, and only later did it become clear that there would not be another. The Yankees released him on October 4. By then, Claudell Washington had played 17 Major League seasons. He had appeared for 7 teams and finished with 1,884 hits, 164 home runs, 824 runs batted in, 312 stolen bases, and a .278 career batting average. Those totals describe a player whose game was never limited to one tool. Nearly 1,900 hits show sustained offensive value. More than 300 stolen bases preserve the speed that made him so dangerous in Oakland. The 164 home runs confirm the power that occasionally erupted with historic force. A .278 average across 17 seasons measures the ability to survive adjustment after adjustment.
He also struck out 39 times against Nolan Ryan, more than any other batter. It is an unflattering record viewed in isolation, but it also places Washington directly against one of the most overpowering pitchers of the era, again and again, across 2 unusually long careers. Washington kept stepping in, Ryan kept throwing. Their paths crossed often enough to leave a record of their own. The Hall of Fame measures do not place Washington close to Cooperstown. His career was not one of sustained superstar production, and the promise of 1975 never became an annual standard. That is only one way to measure what followed. Washington reached the majors at 19 after entering professional baseball as a $3,000 undrafted free agent. He became a World Series champion that same year. At 20, he hit .308, stole 40 bases, and made the All-Star team. Then Oakland traded him, and the easy version of his future disappeared. What replaced it was harder to summarize. There were repeated trades and seasons of uneven production. There were also 2 3-home run games, one in each league. There was a September that helped carry Atlanta toward the postseason, followed by a second All-Star selection 9 years after the first. There was a public scandal and its consequences. There was a Yankees milestone, a movie image that outlived its box score, and enough value for major league clubs to keep calling until he was 35. Washington's final years were followed by a much more private struggle. He had prostate cancer beginning in 2017 and chose to stop treatment the following year. He died on June 10, 2020, at a hospital in the East Bay. He was 65. The geography brought his story close to where it had begun. Washington had been raised in Berkeley, discovered in sandlot baseball, and signed by Oakland. Nearly half a century later, his life ended in the same region from which his improbable baseball journey had started. For viewers who remember the era, Claudell Washington may return in fragments. Perhaps it is the green and gold uniform of a 20-year-old All-Star. Maybe it is a White Sox or Mets box score showing 3 home runs beside his name. It could be the Braves teams of the early 1980s, the Yankees' Milestone, or that foul ball in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Taken separately, those images can make his career seem like a series of cameos. Taken together, they reveal its true scale. The young star Oakland traded before his 23rd birthday did not become the franchise fixture his first full season appeared to promise. But he did not disappear when that future disappeared. He adapted to new teams, new leagues, new expectations, and the changing demands of age. That is the answer his career ultimately provides. The promise of 1975 was real, but it was never the whole story.
Claudell Washington's achievement was everything he built after baseball stopped offering him permanence. 17 seasons, 7 uniforms, 1,884 hits, and a place in the memory of an era that often saw him without ever quite seeing the full distance he had traveled.